Fasten your seatbelts for an all areas access conversation spanning a decade inside Formula One with none other than former Haas F1 team principal Gunther Steiner. Unfiltered Live is an event no Formula One fan, hell, no racing fan should miss. The star of Netflix's smash hit docuseries Drive to Survive will take you on a wild ride through his career in motorsports and his decade of working on the Haas team. And it's for one night only. November 15th, Unfiltered Live at the Cadillac Palace Theater. Tickets at BroadwayInChicago.com.
Today on CityCast Chicago, the state braces for the loss of food benefits, local politicos face protest-related charges, and lawmakers still haven't found a solution to fund transit. We've got a couple friends in to help us make sense of it all. It's Friday, October 31st. I'm Simona Licea in for Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I'm here with the Sun-Times' Tina Svandelis. Tina, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Thank you.
And Alex Nitkin with the Illinois Answers Project. Alex, welcome back.
Thanks so much.
It has been a very busy news week in Chicago. I feel like I've been saying this every week for the past who knows how long, but let's jump right into it. Tina, I want to start with you. I think one thing that folks are watching this weekend are SNAP benefits, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. These are federal food benefits that are expected to stop on November 1st, affecting near 2 million Illinoisans here. You know, the governor did come out and say he wanted to try to help plug some of that gap. What did we hear this week?
He's actually signing an executive order that will direct $20 million to help support some food banks across the state, 7 food banks. And that's to supply over 2,600 food pantries across Illinois. As you said, there's about 2 million people in Illinois who use SNAP, and that's about 900,000 people in Cook County. So this is huge. This is not good. These people will be struggling. And also there's Illinois joined a lawsuit this week with 25. There's 25 states total suing the Trump administration over the SNAP freeze. And they're basically saying, you have some contingency money that you can use to bridge this gap. But obviously the president and Republicans in Congress are using this as a kind of boiling point in the negotiations. So they have said that they would not want to do that. So kind of in limbo until there is a budget.
Yeah, all of this stemming from the federal government shutdown, which I think is now approaching, if it has not already become the longest federal government shutdown in U.S. history. $20 million, Tina, from the state to help. Proportionally, like, how much is that compared to what we'd be getting in SNAP benefits in Illinois? It seems like not that large.
Not enough. It's not that large. Yeah, it's like 5 to 10% of what they require. And this is part of a bridge reserve fund that the state has with $100 million that they kind of planned in the budget for what will we be able to do in emergency settings. So this is just a little portion of that. And obviously, the more they use that, the more they're going to run out. And we don't know what's going to happen. We're only in year 1 of this presidency. And so they're going to have to plan for that kind of reserve fund every year, I think.
Well, something we're definitely going to be watching as the weekend unfolds and over next week. I think it's interesting. I think here in Illinois, compared to some other places, the SNAP news has maybe taken a bit of a backseat because all eyes have been on Operation Midway Blitz and the aggressive immigration enforcement that's been unfolding across Chicago and the suburbs. As always, several updates over this week in sort of what's going on there. Tina, you were in court this week when Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino was being questioned by a federal judge with regards to the deployment of tear gas and other riot control weapons in Chicago neighborhoods. What did you hear? What was that like?
It was really, really, really fascinating just to see this person live, because we've just seen him on TV and in interviews and, social media posts being super proud about what's going on here. And so this was Judge Sarah Ellis, who's overseeing the lawsuit that reporters and protesters filed, just alleging excessive use of force So she called him in. We weren't sure if he was going to come because they didn't tell us. And he did come. He came through the main entrance. There were a couple of protesters there. There was a protester there who had a sign of all the tear gas incidents there were more,
Like a
but that she
list,
knew that
yeah.
a list, just a full list of like Logan Square, Old Irving Park, all these places where tear gas has been deployed in neighborhoods. And so he was on the stand. The judge was super calmly talking to him. It was not confrontational. She turned to talk to him. He turned to talk to her. He said, "Yes, ma'am," a lot instead of "Your Honor." And she did just go over the entire emergency order, the TRO, read it to him line by line about when you're supposed to use tear gas and when you're supposed to give warnings, and question him about the identification of Border Patrol agents and ICE agents. So it was really fascinating to see that side of it, like a judge saying, "Do you hear me? Are we on the same page?" She said that repeatedly to him, and he said that he was. When she said, "You deployed two, tear gas canisters a couple of days ago,"
Him himself, he was on video doing so. Yeah.
he was on video. And so he just nodded. I think that was the biggest facial response that I saw was just a big nod, but that's it. So very well trained on the stand, did not disclose anything. I also think that she did not ask him a lot of questions because he's set to do a deposition. So I think she did not want the defense to say, "Hey, we don't need a deposition anymore," because we got a little bit of information on the stand. So she was very, very careful. She was very upset about the Old Irving Park Halloween incident, which I would say the majority of Chicagoans are upset about this just because parents and children were walking to a Halloween parade with tear gas around. So she mentioned the Halloween incident 2 or 3 times, and she seemed upset about that. And not a lot of reaction from him. But the biggest point of this hearing was that she ordered him into court every day at 6 p.m., which has since been temporarily stayed by the appeals court. But other things that she asked for that I found to be really interesting are she asked for a list of arrests. She wanted arrests from September 2nd until this week of not immigration arrests, but arrests of protesters. She wanted to review all that. She wanted all use of force arrests. She wants Bavino to wear a body-worn camera starting Friday, and that all agents wear a body-worn camera. So there were, people are maybe disappointed that we're not going to hear from him every day for a daily run through, but she did require a lot of him from this hearing.
Just based on reading the tweets and the stories afterward, it gave me very much the vibe of like school teacher scolding a student and student in the corner. I don't know if that's accurate to what you saw, but that was the vibe I got.
Yeah, I felt like it was like teacher student or like nun student. I'm not saying she's a nun, but just like I saw this with April Perry too, Judge April Perry, who is overseeing the National Guard case. It's this very calm, conversational tone, and it's essential because you don't want to say I'm above the law, I'm above things. You're trying to show we have these branches for a reason. I think the judges are being very careful. April Perry talked about getting threats all the time as soon as she got that case. So they're in a very delicate situation in this world right now. So I think that they have to appear just super professional. They have to have like nothing that people can target them for. They're being targeted anyway. So I think they're just trying to be super cordial.
Speaking of Judge April Perry, she is also overseeing yet another case related to immigration enforcement. But this time, the federal government had unsealed an indictment this week of 6 people who had been charged related to protests in Broadview. And those 6 people included some local politicos, most notably, I think, congressional candidate Kat Abou-Ghazaleh, a candidate in the 9th Congressional District. Tina, what are they charged with?
So they're charged with conspiring to impede a federal officer in Broadview. So the translation from there is that there was a protest September 26th, and there's a video that was provided. The video shows Kat Abou-Ghazaleh and several others crowding and pushing against a black SUV, and it's kind of slowing its approach. So this is that argument that they have of you're not letting us leave driveways and you're not letting us move cars and things like that. And obviously we have seen videos of Kat Abou-Ghazaleh being pushed to the ground. She's posted 2 social media videos. There's one of her, she's sitting down, cross-legged on the floor in the street in front of the facility. She's holding a poster and a guy just grabs her. and you can't really see what happens to her. But then there's another video that shows this direct whole. She's a tiny person, just picking her up, and just a big thud of her falling to the ground. So she has been using this in campaign ads. She has mentioned this in fundraising ads. So it's very interesting, this intersection of the campaign world and now this actual federal charges, which is a very serious thing. And if you talk to anyone related to these campaigns yesterday, they're taking this seriously.
I saw the headline, so many of the headlines is sort of congressional candidate among those indicted, charged related to protests in Broadview. And I opened up these stories expecting to see, obstruction or something like that, which is normally a charge you would see associated with protests. And then I saw conspiracy. And I was like, that's really serious. Like, any conspiracy related charge is always a lot more serious than just sort of the standard, like, you were obstructing a law enforcement officer. And I believe carries with it like a max, like 6 years, these charges.
Yeah. We've been hearing that arguments, like during the April Perry case with the National Guard. Justice Department lawyers kept saying that this is a concerted effort, that they kept saying that these groups are gathering off-site and coming to protest. So they're going with this messaging that this is a like super Antifa liberal group manufacturing situation. So I'm assuming we'll learn more, but I'm assuming that that's kind of where they're coming from with that.
Which is sort of wild to think about, because that is how protests happen, is people talk about where to protest and then you go and you show up at the, like, that's
right.
That's
like the No Kings protest.
Yeah.
No Kings protest. People, like, I'm right by Logan Square, the Blue Line. They were all there, like about 400 people waiting to get on the train to go downtown. But that is not necessarily they're all together.
I would hardly call that a conspiracy. I think obviously the candidates and others have pointed out that this seems politically targeted, right? Some of the other sort of folks, as you mentioned, Catherine Cat Sharp, who's a candidate for Cook County Board, also chief of staff to Alderman Andre Vasquez, Brian Straw, who's an Oak Park trustee, and Michael Rabbit, who is a 45th Ward Democratic committee person, along with two others who are included in these charges. This is obviously yet another court case that we'll be watching as all of this unfolds.
November is Homelessness Awareness Month. Now, most of us know homelessness is a problem in Chicago. We see our neighbors sleeping in parks and bus stations, and we want to help. That's why in November, Deborah's Place is focused on raising awareness about what actually works. Permanent housing, not just overnight shelter, paired with supportive services. At Deborah's Place, that model, permanent supportive housing, has helped thousands of women find paths towards stability. When we can provide housing paired with necessary resources, our communities become safer and more livable for all Chicagoans. So learn more about events in the community and how you can support Deborah's Place at deborahsplace.org. If we said it once, we said it 1,000 times. It's spooky season, y'all, but what doesn't have to be so damn scary are your old drafty windows. Not if you replace them with Window Nation. Window Nation offers top quality replacement windows with a lifetime warranty. And if you act now, you can make no payments for 2 years. No, for real, no payments, no monthly payment, no down payment, and no interest until 2027. And if you're looking for high quality, affordable windows for your home, then Window Nation is the place to be. Get started on your free estimate before October 31st to save big on your replacement windows. Get in before Halloween. Head to windownation.com.
Alex, want to bring you in here to talk about something else that we are watching here in Chicago. We are recording this early Thursday morning, which is the last day of the fall veto session in Springfield, where supposedly we were supposed to get a solution to the fiscal cliff being faced by regional transit agencies, CTA, Metra, Pace, and of course the Regional Transportation Authority that kind of unites them all. The clock is ticking, and there's the bill's not been passed yet. We don't have
No, I
it.
mean, honestly, shame on us for expecting that the Illinois legislature would do a certain thing by a certain deadline.
After they were supposed to do it in the spring session.
Sure. I mean, they were supposed to do it years ago, right? This is something that they've seen coming for a really long time. They knew that the ARPA money, the federal money that has been keeping the transit agencies afloat all these years, has had an expiration date that is coming up next year. And they've had all of this time, which is why they put together these working groups. They had conversations. They deputized CMAP, the regional planning agency, to come up with this really vast, intricate plan for how transit should look in the future. And that's how they came up with this number. $1.5 billion in new annual recurring revenue is really what's going to be needed, not just to plug the funding gap, but to really create a reformed, integrated, well-functioning transit system going forward. Of course, the absolute hardest thing that no one ever wants to talk about until they absolutely have to is where we get that money from. And so we have been, it's kind of a similar dynamic that we saw play out with the Illinois Senate in the spring session, where we heard nothing until I think like the second to last day of session. And they had this whole hodgepodge of very controversial tax hikes, and they passed the Senate and never went to the House. And in the veto session, we saw the inverse of that, where the Illinois House, led by Representatives Cam Buckner and Evadina Delgado, finally came out with this plan that they've been plugging this whole time, with a lot of tax hikes that, surprise, are really unpopular, and there are very organized loci of opposition against all of them. And so what really, though, seemed to put the kibosh on their plan was when the governor came out and said that he was against, basically said it's dead, it won't move forward in its current form. And we can talk about the specific ideas that they proposed, but it's basically everything except, ask drivers to pay more, which is sort of the more conventional mode of funding public transit in a lot of places, but has just been sort of deemed a political non-starter. And so they're turning to these kind of more off-the-wall ideas, like a tax on unrealized capital gains for billionaires, and like taxing streaming services and things like that don't necessarily have anything to do with transit.
It's interesting because you mentioned in the spring they came out with this sort of slate of kind of new and controversial taxes. I think in that plan, the big one was tax on delivery services. Now we've got this new proposal out of the House: streaming tax, surcharge on tickets for large concerts, expanding speed cameras outside of Chicago, and then, as you say, this tax on billionaires' unrealized investment gains. And of course, Pritzker, our billionaire governor, came out and was like, I don't think this plan's going to work, and I don't think you've done enough to vet it.
I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of, definitely, if a more cynical way of looking at it is like it targets billionaires and he's a billionaire. I think he did raise a fairly reasonable point of like, this is a really new and complicated tax, and you're talking basically about putting a dollar value on like physical assets and then trying to draw taxes from that, which is, it's not to say that billionaires can't afford that, but it's like legally and practically really difficult to put together and then come up with a sustained, reliable form of funding on that. What kind of surprised me a little bit was also that the governor just came out against the expansion of speed cameras outside of Chicago, which has become pretty regular fixture in the city near parks and schools. And basically he said, no, I don't think that people will like that. He also mentioned that red light cameras, I think he was maybe conflating red light cameras and speed cameras. Red light cameras were caught up in the middle of some graft that was found a couple years ago. I think this was State Senator Marty Sandoval, a big part of his indictment, and like kind of casting shade on the idea of red light cameras and speed cameras for that reason. But again, this is something that communities have been in many cases asking for and have been actually contributing to like people slowing down, and that there is a safety component to that. Of course, the controversy comes in when you are proposing speed cameras or red light cameras specifically for the purpose of raising money, as opposed to making the roads safer.
And I would just add that Pritzker does not want to do anything super controversial this year ahead of the election next year. Obviously, he's pretty safe in the Democratic primary March 17th, but once it gets to a statewide election, he does not want to do super controversial things. So I think he's really looking to kind of tread lightly. If he can, he might have to do some things, but for right now, I don't think he wants to do anything major.
And that just leads me to the question of like, what did he expect was going to happen? Money doesn't just come out of nowhere. And he's had this posture of like, it is very, very important for something to happen with transit. And I trust the House and the Senate and the legislators, and they're going to figure something out. But it's kind of like, how does he, as the leader of the state, expect that something is going to get through if he does not put his weight behind something? Because any new source of funding is going to be unpopular.
The RTA had put out a revised estimate for its gap for this upcoming year, down from, we had been talking about all summer, the $770 million fiscal cliff, revised down to around 200 million, give or take a few million here or there. And, we also saw that CTA is planning on raising its fares early next year. And there is still the potential for service cuts, down the line as early as next year, as early as, sort of like the middle of next year. And so this is still a really pressing issue for all transit riders in Chicago and around the suburbs. But speaking of the suburbs, Alex, you had a story that one of the proposals to help fund transit was to take sales taxes already earmarked for transit and to actually use them for transit. And some suburban counties are really balking at this idea. What on earth is going on here?
Yeah, this is something that my colleague Grace Houck and I have been working on for a couple of months. And it really speaks to, I think, number one, just the importance of transit in the suburbs that often gets overlooked in this conversation. That often just seems like a city versus downstate issue. And also, again, going back to this idea that while all of these kind of out there new unconventional tax ideas are being proposed, because the much more immediate, straightforward ones are just political non-starters. And this is a real example of that. The RTA sales tax, which is a tax that has been collected since the early 70s, was last raised in 2008, a 1% sales tax on pretty much all goods levied by Cook County, and then a 0.75% tax levied by the 5 collar counties in the RTA region, which are Lake, McHenry, Kane, DuPage, and Will counties. Because of the way that tax was negotiated when it was last raised in 2008, the collar counties are allowed to keep a portion of that sales tax, 0.25% out of the 0.75%, 1/3 of it, and they can spend it on whatever they want, as long as it's related to transportation or transportation-related costs or public safety. And so again, this is an RTA tax. It's the RTA sales tax. And so we went through and looked at how these 5 counties are actually spending this money that, again, is earmarked for transit. And we found that less than about 1.5% of it, broadly, of the $193 million that they collected last year, was actually dedicated towards some kind of transit or transit adjacent thing. Like in many cases, they operate these paratransit or dial-a-ride services, which we spent one of our stories really looking into how these counties are doing them, that really have shown sort of a possible way forward for what public transit can look like in the suburbs. But these counties are really not funding them very much. Instead, they are overwhelmingly using the sales tax money for street resurfacing, road repairs, just basic road engineering stuff. And also in some cases, particularly in the case of DuPage County, because of that public safety loophole, they're just using it for their sheriff's office. In fact, DuPage County has come to sort of rejigger its budget over the years to rely on this RTA sales tax to the tune of, $70-80 million a year to fund the majority of its sheriff's deputies and court systems. And so it's really this question of like, what are we prioritizing here that especially suburban counties are using a lot of this money that's earmarked for transit for things that are not transit. And like you said, earlier this year, one proposal emerged that would have clawed back that money and spent it or directed it all toward the new, NETA, Northeast Illinois Transit Authority. And as you can imagine, the collar counties fought back really, really hard. They said, no, we need that money. We need that money for our roads. We need that money for our sheriff's offices. And you can't, it's ours. You can't take it away from us.
When I first read the story, Alex, it's so interesting because my initial reaction is because in the creation of that new regional transportation authority that lawmakers are trying to pair with the sort of financial fix here, a lot of suburban lawmakers and sort of folks in the suburban leaders have really balked at the leadership structure of that because they say it reduces their power in the regional transportation authority, in the sort of what will be a regional transit agency, and that it gives too much power to Chicago. And so I sort of was reading this and I'm like, well, you say you want more power, but you're already not using money for transit that's supposed to be for transit. You're already not doing stuff the way it's sort of intended to be. But then on the flip side, I thought to myself, I was like, well, I could also see how, if you feel like your power in sort of the governance structure is taken away, of course you'd want to hold on to that money even more because that's even more discretion that you might not be allowed to have. And of course, like when we start talking public safety budgets, moving money out of public safety is, you want to talk about political non-starters, like that's like the biggest one.
Right. It's a really good point. I think that look at Northwest Suburban McHenry County, the smallest county in that 6-county metro region, has something like 2% of the region's population. And that's a really huge concern for them. Everyone in that county pays this sales tax. And there's this real question of, if you claw that money back, how much of it is actually going to go to poor little old McHenry County that, people can forget about. The sort of flip side of that is, if transit is defunded in the suburbs, it's going to have a much bigger impact than I think a lot of people sometimes expect. And one of the lead authors of that part plan from CMAP, who we talked to, made this really important point of, if you live in a far out suburb and you've never taken transit in your life and you never will, you had still better be praying that something happens to shore up transit funding, because if not, the consequence is going to be gridlock on the roads everywhere. If you drive, you should be rooting for transit to get better, because the better transit is, the fewer cars are on the road, the less traffic there's going to be.
This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. On Mubi, stream beautiful hand-picked films anytime, anywhere. Right now, you can stream Lurker, a sharp psychological thriller and the directorial debut of the Bear and Beef writer-producer Alex Russell. It follows a 20-something retail clerk who crosses paths with a rising pop star and slowly worms his way into their world, stan culture gone mad, as the line between friend and fan blurs, access and proximity turn into a matter of life and death. Y'all, I saw it at the Music Box about a month and a half ago. I ain't gonna lie, kind of creepy, real suspenseful. You're always kind of on the edge of your seat wondering what's gonna happen. You can watch Lurker and so much more exclusively on Mubi, and the best part, you could try it free for 30 days. Just head to mubi.com/citycast25. That's Mubi, mubi.com/citycast25.
Tina, a couple of stories were from your colleague at the Sun-Times, Lee Bay, favorite guest of ours, who had some architecture stories that you wanted to shine a light on.
Yes, I think we need a little light on architecture this week as we talk about politics and taxes. No offense to politics and taxes, but Lee Bay did have a couple of stories in this week. One was about White Castle remodeling, which just sounds like, fast food corporate things, but obviously there's a cool history with White Castle in Chicago, in that we have an original one on the south side at 43 East Cermak, and that it was basically designed to look like the Chicago Water Tower, which is how I grew up thinking about White Castle. Or even like, the downtown building with the castle at the top.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I always thought that was a White Castle. And I never asked my parents, why is there a White Castle at the top of that building? But so it was ingrained in my brain, this architecture. So they are remodeling This original one still exists at 43 East Cermak. It was built in 1930. It's still there. It's not functioning. Just a very Chicago-y thing. And so Libe kind of unpacked the history there. And he did say that might be a bit of a bummer around these parts.
I was going to say, I'm looking at this rendering. And it just looks, as our social media manager likes to say, it kind of just looks like everything else. Like it's this
Yeah.
very kind of sleek, black box metal.
Yeah.
I can't say this is exciting to me, this remodel.
Right. So you agree with this. It might be a bit of a bummer around these parts. But they did say that people are expecting fast food restaurants to look more like mid scale, not like cheaper food. I think that's what they're going for here. So yeah, we will see what happens with that. The other Lee Bay story that I loved was about the Edgewater Beach Apartments, Alex's Hood. So it's those huge pink apartments that you can see off Lakeshore Drive. I went to Loyola, so I was always super intrigued about what was going on in there. So those were built in the 1920s. There was also a hotel there back in the day, but it was demolished in 1971. It's very Great Gatsby. If you look up listings of this place, people do decorate so fun. I mean, there's normal decorations, but then there's people who go all in with that kind of theme. And there's gorgeous views of the lake. So they are repainting that pink. It's kind of faded, and they have done this before, but I guess maybe 25 years ago they kind of messed around with the paint, but they're doing it again, and it should be totally completed by 2026. So next year. But the cool thing is that they found it's called Sunset Pink. They found the original color of like a paint can left in the building in the basement. And so they kind of created that same color again. And this was built by Marshall and Fox, and that's the same architects who did the Drake Hotel, South Shore Cultural Center, and the Blackstone Hotel. So you can see kind of like South Shore Cultural Center and elements in that building. So I love the history of it. It takes you away from current events and like just this Chicago nostalgia. So God bless Libe.
I love that the color is actually called sunset pink because I live in Uptown near the lake, and like you can literally see the building from the beach. And so if you look to the west at sunset, it is so glowy and beautiful and pink. Yeah, they really knew what they were doing. I love that building also, and really excited.
The hotel used to be called Sunrise Yellow. So it was like this very pastel-y situation. That seemed very cool.
I love that, and I love when we get to like refresh something in a way that honors sort of the history of it. Very different from the White Castle story, I feel like, in a way.
Very different.
Every single day, every single week, we try to end our episodes with some good news. Alex, let's start with you. What's your good news for the people today?
My good news is that it is finally fall. It's something that no amount of politics or other news can take away. It's finally gotten cooler. Fall is the best season. I will die on that hill. Summer's overrated. Come at me. The leaves are changing. It's beautiful. Everything's great. And I would really just encourage everyone to go to a Cook County Forest Preserve that you maybe haven't been to before. I brought my dog Morty, my pit bull, to the Caldwell Woods last weekend, and just get out and explore some new leafy urban oasis, especially now that the Cook County Forest Preserve District has more funding thanks to the tax referendum that passed a couple of years ago.
I knew you were going to mention that.
I bet you didn't think I'd be able to bring taxes into it. But they have a lot more resources, and so they're able to dedicate more to maintenance of facilities and planting more trees and forestation and stuff like that. So it's good. It's healthy. Be around trees, touch grass. That's my good news.
I love that. I love you and I have beef because I am definitely Team Summer over here, but we can overlook that for now. Because I do love the forest preserves. One thing I love is I feel like people sleep on their programming. Like they have a lot of really fun, interesting activities, lots of stuff for the kids. But also like they have a like relatively robust stargazing program. Well, like a lot of them will do guided star walks in the evening. So if that is something you've ever been interested in, I recommend it. It's super cool. So yeah, definitely get out. Tina, what about you? What's your good news for the people?
Good news is just a hot tip and reminder that Chicago has awesome theater things going on, and I've been really into it, and I forget about the world and my phone. I don't care what's going on. I do a Broadway in Chicago package with my mom and my sister, and you do not get to pick the play. So sometimes you're like, okay, I guess we're going to see this, but then it's always adorable. I saw The Sound of Music last night. Avoided the World. It's my like comfort musical. I went to see Ashland Avenue, which was Pam from The Office, Jenna Fisher's. Her husband was a director, so that was about a month ago, and I accidentally met Eddie Vedder there after taking a photo with the cutout of the man in the play after with my bestie who just takes funny pictures. We took a selfie and it was blurry. So she handed the phone to the nearest man. The man took the photo. I took the photo from the man and I said, "Oh, you're Eddie Vedder." And
Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam. For anyone
Pearl Jam, like, oh my
unfamiliar.
God.
Yeah.
And I'm a very into the 90s, very, very went to high school in the 90s, love all 90s rock and all nostalgia and TV shows and Eddie Vedder. And he was adorable and he took a quick selfie with us and ran away. But that's who he is. He's a good dude. He does this. He's kind of elusive. Like you can get him, you got to get him real quick. And then I think he's shy. But so shout out to Eddie Vedder.
Well, so fun. Ashland Avenue, I know, has gotten lots of rave reviews. Folks really enjoying that, including our newsletter editor, Emmy Mack. But yes, no short. This is fall theater season in full force. So many great shows. Oh my God, there's so much good stuff out right now, and pretty much anywhere you look, you're going to see a great show. My good news for the people to round us out. It's Halloween, y'all. We've talked about it a lot. We made it. We're here. Happy Halloween. The question we've been asking is if you had to name a good Chicago costume, like what would be a Chicago inspired costume that you'd want to see out?
I was Rod Blagojevich a couple of years ago.
You went as Rod Blagojevich?
I was able to grow my hair, and when it gets really big, I basically had a political pin and just a brush, a big hairbrush that I walked around with. I need ideas, though, because right after this, I'm going to go into the office where there's a costume competition, and I don't have any ideas. My best thought is to go as a property tax bill and just say that I'm late, because I will be. But that's kind of minimum effort. But I don't know what y'all think.
Yeah, we got a text from Gina in Jefferson Park who said that their favorite Chicago Halloween costume is the Morton Salt Girl, which I do like.
That's
cute.
A
good one.
Yes.
And apparently they've done it a couple of times. Yellow, the rain, get up, etc. An umbrella. And yeah, I'm sure you could walk around with the salt.
I saw someone dress up as a big orange parking ticket. That was a pretty good one.
That is solid. Have you ever, do you have a non-government related Halloween idea, Alex?
I don't understand the question.
Oh boy. It's a solid strategy. If anyone else has any ideas for Chicago inspired Halloween costumes, you can shoot us a text at 773-780-0246. I want to give a huge thank you to our guests this morning, Alex Nicken with the Illinois Answers Project.
Thanks very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And the Sun Times, Tina Sfondelis. Tina, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Simone.
Before we get out of here, I want to thank the people who make CityCast Chicago. Our regular host is Jacoby Cochran. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our Hey Chicago newsletter editor is Emmy Mack. Our social media manager is Rick Hellman. Our music is by Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. Don't forget, you can support this show and get some great perks by becoming a CityCast Chicago neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. When you become a neighbor, you help ensure that we can keep bringing you this show that you love, along with the newsletter, along with our great social media content. So go ahead and join now. That's membership.citycast.fm. We're going to be back bright and early on Monday with our guide to November. Jacoby is also going to be back in the host chair, so you should be back too. We'll talk to you then. Have a great weekend.